great article out in the Intercept by MC McGrath and Glenn Greenwald. I always say Glenn, it's horrible. Glenn Greenwald, titled "How Fake News and Western Propaganda About Russian Interference in Catalonia Coerced Ecuador to Silence Julian Assange." So for those of you who don't know, Julian Assange has been in the Ecuadorian embassy for, I don't know, 6 years almost, 5, 6 years. And for like the last 3 or 4 weeks, he's now had no contact with the outside world. On top of that, he has no internet access. And he's also not allowed to have any visitors. So he's in de facto solitary confinement right now. And he's been imprisoned basically for 6 years. This article is super detailed and it breaks down a lot. I'm going to do my best to read through most of it with you guys because it's that important that we really understand what's going on. This is the depth of which Western forces are utilizing Russia as a boogeyman in order to cover up their own failures and misdeeds, and how truth tellers and whistleblowers like Julian Assange are the ones caught in the middle and the crosshairs and are enduring real human suffering so that people can be aware of what's actually going on in the world. So let's just read. Julian Assange has been barred from communicating with the outside world for more than 3 weeks. On March 27, the government of Ecuador blocked Assange's internet access and barred him from receiving visitors other than his lawyers. Assange has been in the Ecuadorian embassy in London since 2012, when Ecuador granted him asylum due to fears that his extradition to Sweden as part of a sexual assault investigation would result in him being sent to the US for prosecution for his work with WikiLeaks. In January of this year, Assange formally became a citizen of Ecuador. So Assange, an Australian national, stuck in the Ecuadorian embassy for 6 years, just recently became a formal citizen of Ecuador as well. So he has the full rights of an Ecuadorian at this point. As a result of Ecuador's recent actions, Assange, long a prolific commenter on political debates around the world, has been silenced for more than 3 weeks by a country which originally granted him political asylum, and of which he is now a citizen. While Ecuador is willing to defy Western dictates to hand over Assange under the presidency of Rafael Correa, who was fiercely protective of Ecuadorian sovereignty even if it meant disobeying Western powers, his successor, Lenin Moreno, has proven himself far more subservient, and that mentality, along with Moreno's increasing bitter feud with Correa, are major factors in the Ecuadorian government's newly hostile treatment of Assange. So, Assange has been there so long that there's been a presidential change for Ecuador, and the new Ecuadorian president doesn't seem as willing to stand up to Western powers. And that includes the United States, the United Kingdom, and Spain. Yet many of the recent media claims made about Assange that have caused this standoff, which have centered on the alleged role of Russia in the internal Spanish conflict over Catalan independence, range from highly dubious to demonstrably false. The campaign to depict Catalan unrest as a plot fueled by the Kremlin, Assange, and even Edward Snowden have largely come from fraudulent assertions in the Spanish daily El País and the highly dubious data claims from the so-called Hamilton 68 dashboard. The consequences of these false and misleading claims, this actual fake news, has been multifaceted and severe, not just for Assange, but for diplomatic relations among multiple countries. El País and Hamilton 68. El País is a paper from Spain, and Hamilton 68, which we'll learn a little bit more about later, is a a group formed by a bunch of former spooks and intelligence officials and neocons in Washington, D.C. Let's keep reading, though. The Guardian reported last week that doctors who recently visited Assange recently concluded his health condition has become, quote, dangerous. The journalist Stefania Maurizi of La Repubblica yesterday confirmed that Assange, quote, is still in the Ecuadorian embassy in London and unable to access the internet and to receive visitors, end quote. While the official WikiLeaks account provided further details, and we have a tweet there saying, you know, no one but his lawyers can visit him. So here's a little bit of the hypocrisy here. Ordinarily, Western commenters would be lining up to denounce a country like Ecuador for blocking the communications and internet access of one of its own citizens. But because the person silenced here is Assange, whom they hate, their heartfelt devotion to the sacred principles of free speech and a free press vanish. So, however you feel about Assange personally, I think he's a hero and a truth teller and has facilitated many whistleblowers revealing very important information to us. But no matter how you feel about him, this is an attack on free speech, and this is an attack on freedom of the press by international forces, mainly Western countries. The United States, the United Kingdom, Ecuador, and Spain. Spain, the United Kingdom, and the United States are putting tremendous pressures on Ecuador to silence Assange because he is speaking too much truth to power. If what he was saying didn't matter, they wouldn't be working this hard to silence him, and they wouldn't be working this hard to smear him. Let's keep reading. When Ecuador first granted asylum to Assange, both the Ecuadorian government and Assange's lawyers have always said that Assange would board the next flight to Stockholm if the Swedish government gave assurances it would not extradite him to the United States. Although Swedish prosecutors last year dropped a sex assault investigation into Assange, Trump's CIA director Mike Pompeo has vowed to do everything possible to destroy WikiLeaks and prevent it from publishing further, while the United Kingdom, an ally of the Trump administration, has vowed to arrest Assange on bail charges if he leaves the embassy. So this is how the game is played. Now they dropped the bogus charges they cooked up against him for sexual assault, but the CIA director and soon-to-be Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Pompeo, says he will do everything possible to destroy WikiLeaks and prevent it from publishing further. Do you think that might be jailing Julian Assange? Smearing Julian Assange? I think it might be that. And the United Kingdom has vowed to arrest Assange on bail charges if he leaves the embassy. So if he ever walks out of Ecuadorian property, he can be arrested like that by the United Kingdom and extradited to the United States just as fast. Evidence has now emerged that cutting off Assange's communications with the outside world is the byproduct of serious diplomatic pressure being applied to the new Ecuadorian president, pressure that may very well lead, perhaps imminently, to Assange being expelled from the embassy altogether. The pressure is coming from the Spanish government in Madrid and its NATO allies, furious that Assange has expressed opposition to some of the repressive measures used to try to crush activists in support of the Catalan independence movement. The day after Assange's communications were blocked with the outside world, Ecuador issued a statement alleging that Assange's public statements are, quote, putting at risk, end quote, Ecuador's relations with other states. The Ecuadorian government has previously expressed dissatisfaction with some of Assange's political activities and statements, but the breaking point appears to have been a series of tweets from Assange about the arrest in Germany earlier this month of former president of Catalonia, Carles Puigdemont. Beginning in September, Assange has been tweeting regularly about the referendum for independence in Catalonia. Back then, Ecuador released a statement criticizing these tweets and emphasizing that Ecuadorian authorities have reiterated to Mr. Assange his obligation not to make statements or activities that could affect Ecuador's international relations. But why did these tweets about Catalonia, of all of Assange's tweets about politics in other countries and the role he played in the 2016 US election, lead, after 5 years, to such a response? And why now? And why and how did the West succeed in convincing so many of its citizens that the movement for Catalan independence has been a source of internal conflict in Spain for years, was now suddenly fueled by a Kremlin plot with Putin as the puppet master? The answers provide a vivid example of how claims about fake news, Western propaganda, and disinformation can be used as a tactic for political manipulation. The circumstances leading to recent events extend beyond Julian Assange, and understanding them requires background on the political pressures in Spain, Ecuador, the United States, and the United Kingdom, and how these intersect with Assange's case. The article then goes into detail about how Spain was trying to pin the Catalan independence movement on Russia interference, so they had more of an excuse to brutalize and repress a sovereign independent vote of the people in Catalan. And it also goes into detail about supposed journalistic work and evidence provided by El País, as well as, what was the name of the stupid dashboard? The Hamilton 68 dashboard. And let's just read a little bit about the Hamilton 68 group. But from its inception, the dubiousness of Hamilton 68 was self-evident. As the Intercept reported when the group was first formed, it was a brand new foreign policy advocacy organization created by the exact people with the worst records of lying and militarism in Washington. Bill Kristol, former CIA officials, Republican hawks, and Democratic Party neocons. Their advisory council for this Hamilton 68 is Mike Chertoff, Bill Kristol, Michael Morell, Mike Maffall, and the list goes on. And let's just read a little bit more about Hamilton 68. Even worse, Hamilton 68 was and remains incredibly opaque about their methodology, refusing even to identify which accounts they designate as promoting Russian influence online. These marked accounts not only include accounts that clearly state they are pro-Russian or affiliated with the Russian government, but also accounts run by people around the world who amplify pro-Russian themes either knowingly or unknowingly, which often includes any dissent from the U.S. foreign policy orthodoxies endorsed by the neocons and CIA officials who created the group, now branded as, quote, pro-Russian. So Hamilton 68 is a neocon group, and it's basically always churning out information about all these Russian bots and all these puppets and useful idiots supposedly retweeting Russian propaganda. But there's a couple of problems here. Number one, who is the organization founded by and staffed by? That's a big red flag. Neocons, CIA, intelligence officials, Bill Kristol, war criminals. Why are we listening to these guys? And even if you did want to listen to those guys, they're not telling you how they're finding out this information, and they won't reveal the data. Why are these idiots getting stories on front pages? Despite all of these glaring reasons for skepticism, U.S. media outlets repeatedly ingested the claims of this brand new, sketchy group about what Russian bots are saying without an iota of critical thought or questioning, constructing one headline after the next based exclusively on the claims of this murky, shady group. As Rolling Stone's Matt Taibbi recently documented, more and more often now, the site's pronouncements turn into front-page headlines. The article also then goes into further detail about social media, about bots and real followers, and the tools you can use to actually measure what's going on. And it's just a great, quick, short little lesson in how you judge the information you're being presented with, which is, some basic journalistic practices that apparently these major media organizations don't know about. With all their millions of dollars, hundreds of employees, they somehow always get the information wrong, and it always kind of goes one way towards Russia being this boogeyman. Russia's not perfect. They're probably not even good. But they're just another power in the world. And the United States and the military-industrial complex always need an external enemy, and they're very happy with drumming up another Cold War and making Russia out to be this humongous boogeyman that it is not. So just be critical of the information that you consume. And I just want to read the very end of the article real quick. And I suggest you guys all read the full article. It's too long to read here, but the meat of it goes into full detail, completely debunking the narrative that Russia influenced Catalan independence movement. And it also points to the fact that, in fact, the opposite is true. Western powers in media were most certainly using bots and fake accounts to spread anti-independence movements. So there's a serious propaganda war going on, and it takes real journalists to really be able to decipher it. And that's why I'm glad people like Glenn Greenwald take the time to debunk this bullshit, because very few people are, and the majority of people are just drinking this shit like Kool-Aid. But let's just read the summary of the article here. If, as appears to be true, these unsupported allegations about spreading disinformation during the referendum in Catalonia are being used as a tool for political manipulation in the case of Julian Assange, it is working. The escalation of tensions with Spain, which has a strong diplomatic tie to Ecuador, threatens Assange's asylum in a way that the long-standing pressure from the United States and the United Kingdom could not. The intersection of these issues has led to a rapidly deteriorating diplomatic situation founded in part on exaggerated and inaccurate claims of disinformation during the referendum in Catalonia, where Ecuador is being forced to choose between maintaining their relations with other states and upholding Assange's asylum. So, Western media outlets are creating fake news stories. They're using bots to disseminate these fake news stories. And then they are writing stories about how Russia is doing that to them. It's very Machiavellian. Very Machiavellian. It's horrible. It's just a propaganda war. The pattern of events seen here is not specific to Julian Assange, Ecuador, Spain, or any one country. It is a global, systemic problem. Julian Assange just happens to be one of these poor guys who's suffering the most because of this. But this problem is systemic, and this problem is most certainly global. The situation, an illustrative example of what happens when political tensions around internal divisions, in this case Spain and Catalonia, build and break. In the aftermath, people struggle to explain what they see as an injustice and conclude that some foreign person or group interfered to bring about a problematic situation by spreading propaganda or disinformation. This is a very human trait. They don't want to see the nuance of it when it's an internal division. It's much easier for a human to accept that there was a big, scary other that came in, and the other people are who are ruining your life. It's not the people within your own country, it's the people without. Standard xenophobia, other, I'm scared, fear tactic. This narrative grows and shifts the focus away from internal problems and divisions by unifying people against this new external enemy, much the way patriotism surges during a war. This sentiment can then be exploited as a tactic of manipulation for those seeking to support their own agendas and leveraged to pressure external parties. It is also an extremely powerful tool for stigmatizing any internal domestic dissent aligned with, if not controlled by, the foreign villain. Meanwhile, internal tensions continue to build and conflicts escalate with their actual causes ignored in favor of pleasing, simplistic, self-vindicating storylines about foreign interference. Bam! What a way to close this out. That is the God's fucking honest truth. It is an extremely powerful tool to blame an evil foreign actor for these internal problems within your own country. Let me just read this one more time. It is also an extremely powerful tool for stigmatizing any eternal domestic dissent aligned with, if not controlled by, the foreign villain. Meanwhile, internal tensions continue to build and conflicts escalate, with their actual causes ignored in favor of pleasing, simplistic, self-vindicating storylines about foreign interference. In the specific case of the Democrats and Hillary Clinton losing, this is why Russiagate is so important to them. Not only does it allow them to excuse their loss, not only does it allow them to pin Donald Trump on something so they can try to impeach him, but it allows them to excuse all of their actions and the system that allowed a Trump to exist. It's all a way to deflect away from the truth, which is our system is a failure. We have the richest country in the history of the world, and half the people in this country are poor or in poverty. That's not a winning system. That's not a working system. And Democrats don't want to fix it, just like Republicans don't want to fix it. But in order to try and get elected while still not fixing anything and not offering anything to voters, they're going to pretend like Russia is attacking our democracy, quote unquote. Meanwhile, we don't even have a democracy left. We're an oligarchy, and we're run by multinational corporations and billionaires. They run the parties, they run the media, they run our foreign policy. Don't let Trump steal your cognitive abilities. Don't let him excite your lizard brain. And don't let all these people whose lizard's brains are already excited take your eye off the ball. It's the system. The system is the problem, not Trump, not Russia.